Hey there, and welcome to TonalTrends.com Spotter Stats blog. This video is called Keys Musicians Use Most, Part 1. In this video, and then the next one, we'll be taking a look at what keys people use the most or the least when writing pop songs. Alright, I know I gave this spiel in the last Spotter Stats blog, but it bears repeating. This is a study of musical keys used in popular music. By pop music, I mean to say that this data I used for the graphs came mostly from Rolling Stone magazine's 500 Greatest Songs of All Time survey, and from some songs that I teach my students. So yeah, Rolling Stone, like rock, blues, pop, alternative, funk, hip-hop, metal, folk, and all their subgenres. But not classical and not jazz so much. Because I guess for some reason Rolling Stone mag and most pop culture critics and most of the kids I teach guitar to aren't really interested in classical or jazz just now. So classical music trends, jazz trends, you're on the back burner for now, but that's okay, we'll get you later. Alright, first we're going to take a look at keys used overall based off of their roots. That is, the roots across all songs studied, no matter if their tonality was minor, major, Phrygian, or whatever, just so like, as long as that was a tonal center. You know, talking letter names, their tonics, their first scale degree, their do and the do, re, mi's. And this leads us to our most important distinction. See, most of us use the word key to also mean that specific tonality of a tune. But we gotta be careful because it can get kind of confusing when you're separating the collection of notes you use to play a whole song from the one note that all the other notes hang from. So yeah, in other words, there's a difference between the root, or the tonal center, tonic, and the key or tonality or sharps or flats or whatever, which refers to the collection of that note, and then the next most important trendy notes that you're going to be hearing in that song. So yeah, take the key of like G sharp, Locrian, or whatever. G sharp isn't a key itself, all by itself. It's a root. It isn't a key until it's been assigned a bunch more notes that give that specific tonality or key its character, as long as G sharp is the most important note. Okay, after we've looked for key usage across all keys in part 1, in part 2, we'll break down key usage also by, roots and also from the perspective of sharps and flats, as separated into the 3 most common tonalities, like major, minors, and modes. So I just got to throw the modes in with the minors. And blues rock. If you don't know what blues rock is, just go back and watch the last video, the chord usage blog. I talk about it in there a lot. And yeah, someday we'll do a Spotter Smarts video devoted entirely to that subject of blues rock. But for now, that'll be enough. So yeah, speaking of that last blog again, this is only about half as much to take in. We're only talking 12 keys, 12 roots anyways, to those keys, as opposed to the 24 chord triads we were looking at. So I'm hoping if the last blog just kind of left you scratching your head, like too much input, I'm hoping this will be a little less head scratching on the noggin. So yeah, let's look at the charts.
Okay, first chart, keys used based just on their roots across all tonalities. First thing to notice is that E and A, and then G right here, are the gold, silver, and bronze finishers in the survey. And I'll just give you a minute to ponder why that probably is. A-do-do-do, and bop, bop, bop. That's right, guitar strings. Turns out, people tend to write a lot of pop music on the guitar, and the bottom 2 strings on the guitar are E and A. For this reason, E and A chords, whether they're major or minor chords, or even dominant blues rock chords, are relatively easy to play on the guitar. In fact, they may be the easiest chords. And this may be the probable cause for these spiking key root biases. I don't know, what do you think? Alright, next, let's look at the last place finishers, A flat, F sharp, and B. Now these right here, by contrast, are the roots of some hard chords to play on the guitar, major or minor. But I want to be clear though, I'm not like suggesting that these last place guys are the hardest chords to play on guitar. Like I'm suggesting that A and E are probably the easiest. Personally, I think, as a guitar player, E flat is the hardest, most frustrating chord to play on the guitar if I gotta pick one. But more on that later. I guess for now, all I'm saying is the fact that they're not easy to play can't have helped their score on this graph. There are other factors at play here, and we've always got to remember that we're tonal trend spotters, not tonal rule makers. No rules, just trends. Okay, let's dig a little deeper. What are the rest of the open chords, the open string chords on guitar, and what are the open chords built on top of them? Oh, by the way, saying open chord simply means that the chord has an open or non-fretted string in it somewhere. That's how guitarists talk anyway. When a piano player or like music professor uses the term open chord, they mean how the notes are like farther apart from each other in pitch or like on the keyboard. That's an important distinction. It'll be on the test later. Just kidding, there's no test. Okay, the rest of the guitar open chords. G's an open chord, and was the third place finisher, and then C's an open chord, and D. Those are other major open chords, both with above average showings here. Look at that. If you want a cool mnemonic device for this, check this out. Okay, C, A, G, E, and then D spell the word caged. So if you want help remembering the open chords on guitar, and you like hippie love type stuff and motivational posters, just think like opening the door for something that's caged, like maybe a dove or something, or if like a bunch of birds, like open the cage, there they go, they're free, flap flap flap. Isn't that nice? Or maybe if you're like a Star Wars fan, it can be like when Jabba the Hutt opens the cage door and releases the Rancor, and he eats that green pig dude, and then Luke throws that rock, and then the cage door crushes the monster, and then that other fat shirtless dude like cries about it. Crushed door, caged. There's no crushed cages. There's no crush chords on guitar, right? But yeah, anyways, C A G E D, caged, the open chords. All right, now let's consider keys with F for their root. Some of you may have noticed that the fourth place F column on our graph is the only exception to the trend that open guitar chords, whether major or minor, make for more popular keys to play and write pop tunes in. I mean, what's going on here? F's just as hard a chord to play as A flat or a sharp. I'm gonna let you mull that over on your own for just a little bit. Why F had a high showing. We'll come back to it in a minute when we move on to the sharps and flats graph. Okay, so what can we learn from all this easy chord, hard chord to play business? Well, the main thing is that sometimes the tools we have to make art directly affect the art itself. It's like when Picasso went to the paint shop and blue paint was on clearance, so he bought like 50 gallons of it and only painted mostly blue stuff for like 3 years. Now I just made that up, but seriously, some painting materials were in olden days and are still today more expensive to make than others, or at least harder to come by. Or like for sculpture, sculptors are more likely to sculpt out of rocks and stone and wood that's more plentiful in their region. So, in the same way as it can be easier to make art with certain colors or materials, it can be easier to make music with certain chords or instruments. And I know all these, all this sounds kind of like no duh, like obvious, but really, how often do we think about this stuff? If we're being honest, we almost never think about this stuff. So what I'd like to say about it is just because your instrument is easier to play in certain keys doesn't mean you shouldn't experiment with harder to come by stuff or materials. So like maybe use a capo or devote some time to practicing the chords and the scales in keys that are harder to play. Or maybe like tune your instrument all weird and see what that does. You can even try recording your music in one of the easier, more trendy keys, then slow down the tape, or digitally pitch shift to one of the harder keys and then force yourself to relearn it and work with it in that new key. The results you get from monkeying with your source materials might be super, mind blow awesome, or they might crash and burn. But regardless, you're gonna come up with some stuff that you never have thought of if you'd stayed in safer, more conventional, tonally trendy keys. Okay, so I know that's a lot of commentary so far with like guitar and rock bias. It is what it is. If that's frustrating for you now, just just know that in the part 2 video, we'll not only look at the data separated out into major, minors, and blues rock, but we'll also take a look at a graph where the keys songs are written exclusively by piano players. So yes, look for part 2 coming up in fall or winter. One last thing about easier to play in keys based on roots. Almost all the most popular keys in this graph correspond with the white notes on the keyboard, or the non-sharp or flat notes. Only one key that starts on a non-sharp to flat note, B, doesn't fit this trend. Most likely because the tonality of B major uses all 5 black notes. That's the most black keys possible for a white note root. And also, again, B is not an open chord, and so it's hard to play on guitar. All right, now, speaking of black notes, or more specifically of sharps and flats, let's move on to the next graph. All right, keys used based on sharps and flats. Okay, looks like we're a little more top-heavy now that we're viewing the data in this way. That's better. More predictable, right? More predictable in that there's an overall noticeable decline among the bars from no sharps and flats to lots of sharps and flats. The major exception here being E flat major and C minor. Wish I had a better theory for this, but for now, remember how I think that E flat is the hardest, most frustrating chord to play on guitar? This graph may be where this opinion comes into play, but it might not be. I don't know. It could be a fluke. The other obvious exceptions to the downward slope are in the guitar string governed spikes we saw earlier, here, here, and here. Though it's of note that now A is winning when compared to E. We'll save conjecture over why that is for part 2, the part 2 video. Oh, also remember the root F exception from the last graph? Well, look here. The key of F major only has one flat, so that may just be the reason it beat out some of the guitarist's open chords in the previous chart. Another question that deserves time is why aren't C major, A minor, or the keys with no sharps or flats at the top of the pack? Why are they only in second place to G major, E minor? Well, first thing we could do is fall back on the guitar tuning theory again. I mean, it's true that the trendiest chords people play in C major, A minor are harder than the trendier chords in G major or E minor. Namely, the F major chord, bar chord is what I'm talking about. So there's that. But I think I may have another theory that helps explain why C comes in second place, and that is piano fingerings. See, when piano players get better, at least better to the point where they're good enough to get their songs in the Rolling Stone Greatest 500, or good enough that they write songs that the kids I teach want me to show them how to play them. When a piano playing songwriter gets this good at their instrument, by then they've realized that a black note or two makes it easier to play, easier to memorize, not harder. Why? Because black notes can act as pivot points or as points of reference in their playing. Think of it this way. It can be hard to memorize a password that uses only numbers, but throw a letter in there like Z or Q and it becomes a reference point for memorization. Or like when you get directions, it's helpful to throw, if you throw in like a landmark amongst all the lefts and right turns. It's just how our brains work. Okay, last, just for fun, let's put these two graphs together side by side. Alright, keys based on roots and sharps and flats side by side. The order is in alphabet pitch order, and since pitch order is different than number of sharps and flats, the sharps and flats have been reordered to fit next to major key roots, only because major is a much more common starting point. That's the only reason I didn't do it by minors. So yeah, here you can see that when you switch key roots to be with their major key signatures, it makes a pretty big difference for most all the columns, doesn't it? Incidentally, if you want to know some fancy music words for what I'm talking about here, I'm talking about relative keys and parallel keys. Relative and parallel. So what are those? Well, the first graph deals with parallel keys, where you got the same tonic root, but different key signatures, the sharps and flats. That's the blue bar in this third graph here. The previous graph, or second graph we looked at, was all about what are called relative keys, which have the same key signatures but different roots or tonics. The red bars right here are the relative keys. Also, you may have noticed this in the last graph, but look how there's no 7 sharps to flats and only 1 with 6 accidentals. For 6 sharps to flats column, I chose flats over sharps because F sharp major and D sharp minor are just less commonly used in my experience anyway. It was a choice I made, and by no means is it like standard. Some other people might have chosen might have gone the 6 sharps route, and I got no problem with that. Okay, that's really all I have to say about this chart for now. I mean, gotta save some stuff for video 2, right? But I at least wanted to show it to you in case you wanted to, think about it. In the meantime, if you spot a tonal trend that I missed in this video, please drop me a line or post it in the comments section on YouTube. I'd love to hear what y'all think. And thanks for watching a tonaltrends.com spotter stats video blog. Stick around for another if you got the time. Thanks.